don't know if you can see this or not. I'm going to hold it up. I'm showing you the 5 references for the next 5 weeks. This is the first week. That's the second week. This is the 3rd week, 4th week, and 5th week. So there's a variety of subject matter if you're interested. This week we're doing that 1949 video of the South Shore tracks. And the colors we are using, let's see if I can not cast a bunch of shadows here. The colors we're using are ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, cobalt blue, sap green, and raw sienna. Again, it's a very simple palette, but I feel that when you're learning, you need to understand cross-mixing of colors, and the simpler it is, the better off you are. So in the video that I took, this thing has a pink sky, which that's not correct, of course. So we're going to be changing the color of the sky and a lot of the background. So the first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to wet just the sky with the spray here, just a little bit, not much, just to make the watercolor flow. And I'm going to use a little bit of ultramarine blue and a touch of the cobalt blue and a little bit of the raw sienna, because we want kind of a gray sky, a little bit more cobalt blue here. So we got kind of a grayish sky. Again, don't overmix your colors, because one of the nicest things about is when you put down a wash in a brush stroke, you can see various colors showing up in here. So I'm going to take that, and I am going to just take the color that I just put down and add a little bit more raw sienna to this and use the first grade down color. And as the sky comes down and around, it has a little bit of a yellow cast down towards the horizon many times. I'm going to add a little bit more raw sienna. And while this is still wet, I can still play with it. So I am going to add a little bit more of the cobalt blue and the ultramarine blue up towards the top, just a little bit more. Because the sky is always darker nearest us, which is the top part of the sky here. And I'm going to go to my little bit smaller brush, and I'm going to take the sap green with a little bit of the raw sienna to start with, and I'm going to paint this tree in right here right away, because I want to get the basic imprint of the picture down right away. So while I'm putting this in, I'm also allowing things to be very soft. What you want them as soft as you can possibly have them in the first round. You don't want any hard edges. I'm adding a little bit of cobalt blue here. And since we have the shadow side of the house, I'm going to incorporate that also. So I'm using a lot more water, because the more things that you have combined within the first wash, the better off you are. So I'm going to put a little bit of the shrub there, and I'm going to come across here with the outbuilding that's there. Then I'm going to go all the way to the back here, and I'm going to take a little bit of the cobalt blue mixed in with that same color. I'm usually adding colors to the mixtures I already have, so you're not mixing up new colors all the time. Always back and forth, so that you'll have unity within your watercolor. So I'm adding different combinations of those colors right away, so that you get that variety running across. And right through the telephone poles or the electrical poles for the South Shore. And then I'm going to come in with some stronger color with some raw sienna mixed here within that green. And I'm going to start by I'm going to add a little bit more water, because it's going to be lighter back here. And I'm going to incorporate the buildings here again. I'm leaving lights of the roofs and so forth at this particular point. And I'm painting in downward motions for those tufts of grass that are showing up. I'm not worried about the rails. I'll pull that up later, that shiny, glistening color. And add a little bit of sap green and a little bit of ultramarine blue to this. Then I'm going to add a little bit of burnt sienna as it comes towards us. And I'm leaving a little bit of white here and there, but I'm painting in these small movements going down to create the feeling of those tufts of grass that I feel are important to the subject matter. I know it's a lot to remember on this, but I will review it before I hand it over to you. So I'm going to put that shadow side of the building there and there. And then I'm going to continue with the tufts of grass. I'm going to add a little bit more burnt sienna, and I'm going to add a little bit of cobalt blue. So I need to grade it a slight bit, because there's no real super intense color on this. And I'm moving this color around I just mixed up, and I'm making this darker in the foreground. Then I'm going to go for more raw sienna back here. And just let one thing bleed into another. It won't hurt anything, because you can always carve things out later. I'm going to take the toothbrush to this in a minute. So that part is done, blocked in. And I'm going to take the cobalt blue and I'm going to hit it over in here to slightly gray it down, tone it down, darken it, and it will pull some of the sky color down into the thing for better unity. And I'm just barely spritzing some of this stuff. So, okay, what I did is I wet just the sky, and I started off with ultramarine blue, a little bit of cobalt blue and raw sienna, and I covered the whole top part of the sky and started adding raw sienna down here to get that softening yellow effect, and it will recede better. Then as I came down here, I came over to this part here, and I started with the yellow greens, and I had a little bit of blue in there. I encompassed the house with the same color. I'm not worried about the house being white. I'm worried about the value. And then I encompassed the shed, the back sides of the shed, leaving the roofs white, and traveled across to the other side here a little bit. And I put the background in with cobalt blue and sap green and a little bit of raw sienna, because this is not going to change too much back here. We got one little thing here. This needs to be in shadow. And then I came down and added different combinations of raw sienna, the burnt sienna, a little bit of the cobalt blue, and I painted in downward motions to start the feeling of these tufts of grass that are coming through here. And it doesn't have to cover the whole board, as you've seen. Okay, so you can get started on that, and I will take any questions that you have, of course.
Can I see the brush that you're using for the background? Because I mean, I have, it's so wet that it just uniform.
I used this is a rosemary pointed oval, as they signify, because it reacts very much like what other companies call, this is called a cat tongue.
Okay, because I bought that set of 3 that you had suggested, and they're all round and they hold lots of water.
Yes, they do.
It's very difficult to paint this because I have it's so wet, and the colors are all flat.
Well, what you need to do after you mix or clean it, you can take and squeeze out a lot of the water and then mix the colors. I like it very wet at the beginning because if you're working from light to dark, this assures you that you're not going too dark. Because the more water you have, you can always go darker, but you can't go lighter that easily. And this is why I use more water and I use less pigment at the beginning. Even though it maybe look like a lot of pigment, there's not a lot here. Because as we discussed last week, this is showing up dark on my monitor. And I would say it's about 25 to 30% less value. And if you look at the small iPad here, I don't know if that comes up, but it's not even looking the same value, because this value comes up half on my other iPad. So it's just a matter of being a little bit looser. You let the water flow a little bit more. The timing of the watercolor is always important. At this point, we have glistening of water down here, but we don't really have it up here. So you don't want to go back into it at that point, because then you can get really messed up. You'll end up with blooms all over the place.
And your browns were mostly raw sienna and burnt sienna in the front.
Raw sienna, burnt sienna, and cobalt blue,
Okay.
and a little bit of ultramarine. So really what I'm doing in essence on this particular painting, since it is from a 1949 video, their color wasn't that good back there. So I am making up a lot of this. So what is in the photo is not what we're going to end up with, of course. I'm going to take a still picture of this. I'll put it right back up. But just try to have the colors, one color flow into another color. That's what creates a little bit of the change of value, color, and temperature, and it gives you a little bit more looser feeling. You can always go back and divide later on. And we always do adjustments of values anyways. but this is the fastest part of the painting. After you go into the second, third, fourth, and fifth phases, your process slows down to almost a crawl. You're not supposed to shake your head, Christiane. It's not that bad.
Oh my
Let
God,
everything,
yes.
let everything flow together.
Ah, just I'm trying to.
You should have seen the first time I did a portrait watercolor.
Oh, I do want to try that.
Yeah, I was
That's
shaking
gonna
my
be
head.
challenging.
I was shaking my head so bad I ended up with a neck ache.
Okay.
But keep it loose, let things flow together. Just assume that anything except the buildings, the building roofs have no boundaries. Let it flow in. I'm going to take the hairdryer to this just for a moment. Janet, you must be done by now, right? Almost. I figured. I could tell by the way you're looking at it.
I think I make too heavy of pencil marks.
Don't worry about it. You can erase some of them.
Erase it with the watercolor.
I'll have to maybe erase a couple of mine right through the watercolor.
You can erase it through the watercolor?
Yes, I'll show you.
Huh.
Once I get to that stage. You have to
Okay.
use a kneaded eraser. You can't use a pink pearl or anything that's harsh
Oh, okay.
because you'll ruin the paper, especially
Right.
if you're going back into the painting where you erased harshly will show up in a very dark manner because you've opened up the fibers of the paper.
Right. Mhm.
Do you have flies in your studio, Janet?
No, thank goodness. I just don't want it to drip when I show it to you.
I had, I would say about 5 years ago, when we started doing videos in the studio here, I had a horde of flies. I don't know how they got in, where they got in, how long they were here. And I got rid of all of them except one. And it stayed on the end of my brush up here through half of the video, like, and merely put down a little arrow that was my helper. Because we couldn't stop laughing. The darn thing wouldn't leave.
That's when you get the fly swatter out.
I had an electric fly swatter that my students were using in the studio. And one student got so excited, she's running around the studio swatting flies, and you hear this little zzz, zzz.
All right, here you go.
All right. Okay, what about this corridor right here?
Oh,
Thought you were done, didn't you?
I did. Okay.
That's all got to be filled in. We're going to lift up that certain shiny parts of the rail, but it's not going to be as shiny as it is in the picture. And it's not going to be as shiny all the way back because remember your lights get darker. So there's going to be more of a suggestion back there than anything.
And of course, I cleaned my palette already. All right. Not a problem. Thank you for catching it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why we have white.
Well, white is supposed to be planned, Christiane, not.
I know, but right now my foreground is saturated in water. There's no white spots, basically.
Well, that's all right, because I'm
Not in the right spots, at least.
well, I'm going to be getting rid of these white spots. I just.
Oh, okay.
For the time being, it's not a problem.
Diana, do you want to look?
Yeah.
If I can.
Oh, I lost you,
Well, I can still, oh, wait a minute.
but I can't see you.
Yep, okay.
Okay, there you are. Okay, yeah, that's good.
And it's not too dark.
No, I'm very happy with that, Diana.
Me too, me too.
You're coming to the lighter side.
It's hard to get out of the dark side.
Yes, it is. And it's also hard to get out when I have students that are always too light to get them to go to the dark side.
I'm gonna turn my camera around and can you see this big floral thing that I'm working on?
Yeah.
It's too dark.
I would have to look at the photograph and what kind of flower it is.
I'm not sure what kind of flower it is, but the photograph is much lighter. It has, a more ethereal feel to it.
Okay.
So I'm trying to figure out to whether I'm just going to do a wash, sort of a light grayish over the whole thing.
I wouldn't do a light grayish. I would work in the background around the flower and put darker darks in the background here and there to push those flowers out.
Yeah. Well, it's one big flower.
All right. Well,
And
work around it and break the area up. Don't make it a constant dark wash equally everywhere in the same color. But
yeah,
break it up
no,
so you see some stems, some leaves, whatever. You may have to do a little bit more drawing in the background.
I have chalk drawing, white chalk.
Yes.
In places where I have to more define the petals and
Yeah.
and whatnot. So yeah, this is my Friday class with Kim.
Uh-huh.
That
What-
actually
Kim-
this was
Kim- Kim Roth?
yes,
Okay.
yeah. Somebody asked me to do this for them. And so,
Remember, you're not stuck and adhered to the photograph that much.
oh,
Painting, remember.
yeah. Oh, no, it's but it's interesting. Actually, the painting's hanging on my wall, the original.
Yeah.
And but it was some cheap thing I bought at like Hobby Lobby with no signature or anything. But the petals are a little more defined and it's not so bright. And but I figure I got a whole month yet to finish it, so,
Yeah. Let's, let's procrastinate to the last 2 days.
yeah.
I've done that
No,
too.
I actually work on it in addition to Friday, at least 2 hours during the week.
Yeah,
I figure you have to do that if you're going to get better. You can't just do it once a week.
exactly. When Marilee was designing a water gardening magazine and I was doing the illustrations for it, I got done with this illustration I was illustrating an article for a fish veterinarian, yeah, out of Madison, Wisconsin. Little did I even ever think of a veterinarian for fish, but he deals with the wild fish and the koi fish and what have you. And I got done with the illustration. I did something I always told my students at college not to do, is put a can of pop on their desk open.
Ooh,
And I hit the desk, it tipped, and it rolled right across the illustration. And it was due that afternoon to get it to printing and so forth. So I took it upstairs to my wife, where she's got her studios upstairs. And I says, "Is this good enough?" And she looked at me, she goes, "What did you do?" "Oh, that's a can of Pepsi. It's got a nice effect, doesn't it?" She says, "Well, I guess you're gonna do it over." I did it over and it came out a whole lot better. And because I used the first one for my rough.
yeah. Well, I did two other versions of my big flower on smaller canvases
Yeah,
to know what not to do. The first one was very dark.
yeah, yeah.
And so, yeah. So even though this was supposed to be a paid for piece, I don't know that I could charge the person what it's actually cost me in supplies.
Well, wait till you get done. It's
Yeah.
what my suggestion is. Okay,
Yep.
Christiane, how are you doing?
Oh, me? Oh, fine.
Is it too wet to hold up, or are you okay?
Oh, yeah, hold on. I'm trying to get more white here, the roof. I don't know. Okay, fine. Here we go.
What you got? No, you're fine. That's good.
Keep saying that.
Yeah.
But when I look at it, I don't think it's fine.
Well, it's the beginning part of the painting. And there's many times where I'll do a painting, very abstract looking with no drawing. I've done this with the students before. In fact, the last one we did at the last session was with no drawing, and I started working with patterns. It looks like chaos, like a train wreck. And
Yeah.
then you start building up the patterns and you bring it all together. So don't worry too quickly.
Okay. I'm gonna worry too quickly.
It's the same thing I said to my brain surgeon. It looks like a mess up there. Okay, now we're going to start in the background, come forward again as we always do. And I'm going to start with take a smaller brush here. And I'm going to take the ultramarine blue, a little bit of the cobalt blue, and I'm going to take a little bit of the raw sienna and some of the sap green. So I mix up a little bit of a puddle here, and I take that and I move it out and add a lot more cobalt blue because we're cooler back there. I'm going to add quite a bit more cobalt blue here. So I keep on mixing, going across, if you can see this, from one to the other, so that I have a range of color here that I'm using. And I'm going to start off with a lot of water, a little bit more water, and I'm going to move that pigment around. So if it gets too dark right away, you can always add more water to the pigment and manipulate it a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit more cobalt blue. And the thing that I'm doing here is I'm just adding slight value changes, nothing more than that, and add a few little accents of color in while it's wet. And I'm going to add more cobalt blue as I go back, because this is further back than this is here. So it gets cooler, and a little bit of the green, but it's going to get a whole lot bluer. And it's going to be very simple. So that it just sort of runs off over here, so that this will appear further away, this will appear closer to us. I'm going to soften this just a little bit. And I'm gonna bring, bring up a little bit of different foliage in here. That it's just not so even. Too straight. I'm gonna add a few accents of the straight cobalt blue and let it blend with the rest of what I put down. I put him around the building so that it has a tendency of making a little bit of an accent there around the buildings. And then take just a wet brush and soften it a little bit. Now I'm gonna go travel across to this side, excuse me. And I'm gonna take the sap green with a little bit of the cobalt and a lot of the raw sienna, mix it back and forth a little bit, not over mixing it to get one color. And I'm going to take and I'm going to dry brush this in. So side of the brush, my brush is very dry. And I'm barely touching the paper. Excuse me. And I'm manipulating it in between as I'm going so that it's not real spotty. I want it to hold together to a certain extent. I want to be able to show some of the trunks and branches and so forth in between. And give it a little bit of a extra odd shape up here. Now I'm going to add a little bit of cobalt blue as we go down, because it's going to get cooler as it goes away from the light. I want it a little bit darker up against the house. And then add some darks up in there while it's still wet, so it diffuses within that area. Take a little bit more green, mix it in with the raw sienna. You've noticed I've omitted a number of buildings and poles and so forth because it got quite busy. There's things that you don't need in a composition, and that's one of them. I'm also going to take and I'm going to put a small tree out here at this edge of the house, dry brush it. This is something I'm doing while I'm thinking about what it needs. I didn't have it planned, but sometimes the painting tells you things that you need to do. If you listen to what's going on in there, that's why when you go back into the second round, third round, fourth round, whatever the case may be, you slow your process down. This is not a timed thing going on here. But I'm allowing the painting to tell me certain things so that I don't rush through it and make mistakes. I got to pull out the roof here a little bit. Now I'm going to go into the shrub that's behind the house. Right in here. And again, I'm being very careful about how I'm putting it in so that it doesn't overtake the house and it doesn't get too dark, or because lighter is always better than too dark at this particular stage. Like so. And I want to combine the back end of the shed in with this, with a little bit more blue and a little bit more of the burnt sienna. Like so. So I'm starting to make a little bit darker passage. I'm going to soften that down at the bottom with some of the grasses. I'm going to do the same thing off on this side here. I'm going to take a little bit of pure burnt sienna and I'm going to accentuate this side of the shed, and then the rest of it, not so much. So I'm just going to bring this across and allow the shed to be kind of shabby looking. I don't have a straight line there, kind of waves, which is fine. That shows a little bit of the character of the building. And allow that blue, green, green to fall right into it. The roof still defines the building, so you don't have that to worry about. And I'm going to travel across through here fairly rapidly. This I took a little bit more time with. So I'm going to take a lot of raw sienna with that green and grab a little bit of that burnt sienna I had off on the other side. I'm going to use a lot of water again because I want to maintain the lightness back in here. If I have too much dark back here, I'm going to get myself in big problem because I don't want to end up having to lift things. There is a method to my madness. One of the hardest parts about demonstrating, I was talking to a couple of students last month who added more burnt sienna, demonstrating in this manner, whether it be in person or on Zoom, is I have a lot more stop and starts. So you kind of lose your momentum sometimes on what I'm doing. So I'm thinking a little bit more on what I'm doing. Now I'm going in between and I'm making different brush strokes in a downward angled motion back and forth to create that feeling again of the tufts of grass, because the first one's kind of dissolved a little bit, which is all right. I'm not going to do it everywhere, but I want to get certain things situated. And off over here on the right-hand side, I'm simplifying because I don't want your eye attracted to too much going on over there. The last thing I want to do at this point is I want to kind of soften this back here, straightening out the edge of the ground to the trees, which is horizontal planes will always pick up more light than vertical planes when the sun comes from above. And I'm going to pull up a little bit more light back here because I want this to recede faster. And at the same time, Christiane, it's taking up some of the pencil lines. So I'm going to stop.
You're just using water?
Just water to lift this and this. There's lots of times where I'll go back in the middle of something or while I'm doing it, and I'll lift a little bit that I feel that needs to be softened, lightened, blended, whatever the case may be. But I don't like to go too fast at this point because this is the point where you could lose the painting. There's several points, but this is the first major point where you can lose the painting. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of this cobalt blue, put my hand up here like this, or what I'll do is I'll do this. Take white paper, and I'm going to spray this area a little bit with some pigment to get some texture. So I use that as a mask and then bring up just a little bit more in certain areas. And I'll leave that alone for now. So what I did is I started off over here with a little bit more pigment, a little bit darker, a touch darker, Diana, not a lot.
Yep.
And I added cobalt blue, raw sienna, a little bit of the ultramarine blue. And as I just hit past the middle of this shed, I lightened it up. And then I traveled across to the tree, dry brushing. I'm going to pull up some stuff later, but I added color to the tree, dry brushing, made it soft. And then I came down and added this in here back in the building, which will be darker later on. And then I decided to make a small shrub, which is out in front of the house, just to play this value off of that value, because this wasn't strong enough and I did not want to make this darker. So then I came along and I started with this shed and I added a punctuation of pure burnt sienna. And then I came from the back with the color that I had back here and ran it across, keeping the roof a little bit on the wavy side. But that added a feeling of the color back here and a feeling of the color that I added up front. And then I traveled across here very simply by adding more to the midground of the painting. And then I lifted that lightness back there. And I'm looking at that while this is drying. So every time I look at it while it dries, I'm going to determine what I need to do next and how I'm going to do it. So you guys can go ahead. I'll take a picture of this real quick. Get my sponge out. And I'm just starting to get the foreground feeling the way that I want to right up in the middle ground, because you don't want to put too much texture emphasis up in here. It's going to be right in this area here, a little bit over here, but not a lot equally everywhere. Because then it's going to be too confusing to the eye, too busy. So you have to have a little bit of that variety going on with the texture and where you're putting it.
Dale,
Yes.
the little building, the shed to the left, did you put the bushes in front of it first, the green, and then do the burnt sienna?
Yes,
No,
I did.
oh,
Yeah, I did this first and then I did this.
okay.
You could do it the other way around. You notice I've shifted the sheds around a little bit more.
And then the shed on the right is a little more brown, not as red.
Yeah, it has a little bit.
No, no,
more-
still on the left, but
This
the
one,
second,
okay.
yeah,
Yeah, this is a little bit less, a little bit more brown, has less green in it, but doesn't
Mhm.
have the accent of the burnt sienna. It might later on, I don't know. Usually I have an idea of what the painting is before I pick up the brush halfway through. And then I work from the painting, what it's kind of telling me from that point. Janet, if you put your ear down to the canvas, it will talk to you.
now, the far shed, I have more of the side showing than you do.
Here,
No, other side, left side. Keep going, one more building, that one.
I have a very little bit of it showing.
So
I'm
cover
gonna-
it with the bush.
The reason why I don't have a lot showing, because it's very light, and if you're trapping that much light in here, I'm not going to have it that light. But if you're trapping that much light between two darks, it's going to shine too much.
Okay.
So if you have more of it showing, it will be toned down. This is kind of an interesting area because I went out there trying to find this intersection of the railroad tracks, and it's no longer there, nor the buildings are there any longer.
Huh.
Which doesn't
So this-
surprise me.
So this is a piece of history.
Yes, it is. Well, everything we're doing is a piece of history to a
I
certain
know.
But it's interesting to go back and look at what may have been there. There's actually a foundation to the house. The poles have been taken down and new ones put up, of course. Track has been
Oh.
reworked.
That's weird.
I'm gonna take the hair dryer to this for a minute.
Can I have you look at it before I mess anything else up?
Sure thing. Go ahead.
All right.
All right. What is that? You don't want this alley in here. Light. Just travel right across it, and we'll lift
Oh.
out the important parts about through it.
Okay.
Just get that covered up. Janet had done the same thing in her first wash, but she covered it up.
Hey, I'm not going too dark.
No, you don't want to go too dark. Just lightly add passages of that raw sienna with the burnt sienna, a little bit of cobalt. You always want to keep your application of the color simple, and then you add on top of it later on accents of colors and change of value, and you're going darker and darker as we go through it when necessary. How you doing, Christiane?
Oh, okay, it's just I don't know, I think I'm gonna add more trees behind the house because I can't get rid of this line, so. Particularly like.
All right, Dale, take another look, please.
All right, that's much better.
Okay.
You want to keep that path kind of covered up to a certain extent. How you doing, Janet? All right, good. Very good.
Did we add anything to the foreground,
Nothing.
or mid-ground, or nothing?
I did a little bit through here in the mid-ground and that was it. And over here, I just did a quick wash because I don't want too much texture following off to the right.
Okay, so right below that house there, you added more dark, right?
A little bit. I mean, I'm talking about maybe a 10-15% value change right through here.
And that was the, what colors did you use for that
That was
again?
the burnt sienna, raw sienna, a little bit of cobalt blue. And right above my brush there is where I worked. I did not work below it.
Okay. All right, let's try that and see what happens. Cobalt blue, okay.
Just a touch of cobalt to gray it. Because the burnt sienna being a red and
Right.
you have the yellow, the raw sienna is already grayed down. You
Yep.
add that red to the others and it will gray it down automatically. And
Okay.
with the blue. But the idea is not to go too forceful at the beginning on most subject matter. On other subject matter, there isn't one way to attack a painting, a watercolor, or an oil. In certain things, you want to go more softly. Walk softly and carry a big stick at the end.
Yeah.
Teddy Roosevelt, famous painter. Janet, you could probably leave your mute off since we have such a small group. You can leave your mute off since we have such a
Then
small
you'd hear
group.
me swearing and all kinds of stuff.
That's what I want to hear. I want to feel the sweat or hear the sweat dropping.
Oh yeah, there's sweat dropping, I'm telling you.
No, it's too cool with the air conditioning on. Had to turn it on.
I have a flannel shirt on down here because it's cold. And I have all the vents turned off to the basement where I'm at.
I don't have my air on. I just have the fans going and I mean, it feels pleasant in here.
I used to have a thermostat that allowed you just to turn the fan on, which cooled the house. But when I had the new furnace put in, they changed the thermostat and I don't have that anymore. I like it just with the fan on until you need the air conditioning, but.
Yeah, we can run our fan and we do leave the fan on all the time because we have an electronic air cleaner.
Yeah.
But then the air comes on when it needs to.
Okay, I'm going to come back for one more check. We'll start with Christiane.
Okay.
One more check.
Yes, before we start again.
Okay.
All right, this
No,
is what
that-
you get with having me not mute.
Christiane, that's fine. That's good.
Okay.
Oh my God, how did you do that so fast?
She's got everything numbered.
Clearly. Oh my God.
Diana, how are you doing?
Hold on a sec.
Okay.
All right, I just have to flip my iPad around.
All right, you're good. Did you lose the building off over here?
Did I what?
Did you lose the building off over here?
No, well, it's like the same color as the ground, so I need to change its tone.
Well, you want to leave the roof white. Or
Right,
light. It's going to be light. It's not going to be white.
But no,
It's
the-
it's gathering up the light from the sky.
I either gonna have to put it a green or a blue wash on it because it's pretty much the same color as
All right,
the
that's fine.
dirt.
Well, we could change the value of it. It's no big deal. And Janet, let me see yours again, please, with a smile.
No.
Smile.
All right,
Nice.
you're very good. The only thing is you have this right in here, Janet.
Mm-hmm.
This too dark. Should
It
be
is dark, you're right.
Should be dark here. And light. This is further away.
Sure.
So take your wet brush and pull it up. Use your paper towels to
Yep.
pull it up a little bit. But wet it with a brush and then put your paper towel on top of it. Don't scrub it though.
Okay.
But yours is fine other than that. Don't be too critical of what you're doing. When I started painting, I'd have little sections I liked that I would cut out and put up in front of me in my parents' basement when I was working as a student. And those sections started to grow as I did better. But it took quite a while.
Dale, you want to take another look at my little house and see if that's enough difference?
That's fine. That's good.
Ooh,
Yes,
Okay.
I like that.
she's willing to sell.
Hey,
I get 10%.
Hey, I'll give you 20.
Okay, there
Hey.
you go. All right, yeah, that's getting better. You still need to make this a lot lighter. You might need to scrub that. That has to fall way back.
yeah, I'm thinking maybe sponging.
Take your brush and scrub it, your 1-inch brush and scrub it. Just lightly. Caress it.
Rub it lightly.
Rub it lightly, and then take your paper towel like this and pull it up till you do it repeatedly till you get to your desired lightness, because if you're too aggressive, the paper is going to get ruined.
Do a little 1/2-inch flat brush that like that.
Put a half-inch flat is nice.
Because it's gets in those small places.
Exactly. But you don't need to be aggressive about it. You do it repeatedly until you get it to the desired lightness.
Is that light?
Much better. Okay. I'm looking at it within its own frame of reference. Hold it up again. Hold it up again if you would. Yeah, you're fine. Okay, that's much better.
Okay.
It doesn't, I'm not judging it by what's here, what's in the photograph. I'm judging it by within the frame of reference that you've painted. So you're fine.
Yeah, I could always spray some water while you do the next step and let that soak in, and maybe it'll push it back.
Well, you have to do it. You have to do it immediately because it will dry, and you're stuck with what you have. You can't leave it. Just leave it there. You have to put it down, lift it, put it down, lift it. To you want to get where you want to go.
Okay.
Because if you leave it down there too long, it's not going to do anything.
Okay.
It's like leaving the baby in the bath water too long. It'll end up just as dirty when it comes out. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna start again.
Okay.
And we're gonna start from the left-hand side over by the house. We're gonna work on the house, travel across, work on this, and then come down through the foreground. So back to that tree back there. I'm gonna mix up a kind of a greenish color here. And then I'm gonna add the raw sienna to it. A bit more green and some cobalt blue. So we end up with kind of a mid-tone green here. And I'm going to be very careful, and I'm going to come alongside the house here. Just a little bit, then make it a little bit darker. And I'm not painting a straight line here. I'm adding small accents of dark so that it's not a continuous line. So I'm dry brushing again up against the house so that the house will come forward being lighter and the tree will recede being darker. And I'm going to take that same dark up in here so that my lights or midtones in the middle of the tree will begin to shine a little bit more. So I'm going to hold this up to the camera so you can see this. I hope you can see this. I've got dots and dashes of that dark, and it has that mid-tone showing up in the middle. So I'm not making the whole tree the same value of dark. I'm simply adding accents of the dark to show up the mid-tone and the lights a little bit more. The trunks and the so forth I'll be adding later. I'm going to go around the edge of the shed here. And I'm going to add a little bit of cobalt blue to this, so that the little bit edge of the shed will come out just a slight bit. And I don't want it to come out shooting at you. It has to remain soft. And again, I'm not concerned about the trunks and the trees, the branches. I'm working on the larger things. So I'm going to come over to the bush, shrub, or whatever's in the middle here. And I'm working around a little bit here and there. I'm not getting too quick, too dark, too fast. I'm going to add a little bit of dark there at the bottom so that it has a little bit more form to it at the bottom than it does the top, because if I have too much going on up here, it'll be too stark up against the light building, or too much contrast. So there is a method to the madness that I'm doing. Then I'm going to take some burnt sienna mixed in with the green, and I'm going to darken this shed in quite a bit more. I'm going to take a little bit of ultramarine blue with that too. And I'm going to pull up a little bit of it around there like that. I have a little bit of a cast shadow underneath the overhang. And I don't want these two buildings to be the same. So I'm being very careful on how they're being portrayed. Because if they're all the same, you're dividing people's attention just a little bit, which you don't want to do. So I'm adding a little bit of cobalt blue here. I have a couple little windows I'm putting in right here. Whether I need to put any more in or not, I don't think so at this point. The next thing I need to address is the roof. And the roof, I have a lot of burnt sienna and a little bit of cobalt. So I'm going to address this very lightly to begin with, kind of sneak up on it. It's got to be grayed down with the blue, and I'm going to add just a touch of green into it because we have so much green going around the subject matter. So I'm going to very lightly, Diana, very lightly start to put in the roof. And I'm going to be very careful about not painting the roof all the same color, because that will be detrimental to your painting. I'm trying to get, already I have 3 colors that are noticeable in the roof right here. I have the blue, I have the green, I have the brown. And I'm going to add a little bit more brown as I go back. And then so I don't have too much of a break in value here. I am adding all sorts of different colors up in the roof, and I'm graying it down as it goes back. So this will help define the house just a little bit more, and it will bring it into the realm of the rest of the painting. And I'm going to wait here just a minute because this roof here is going to be a tad lighter at the top, going to get darker down towards the bottom. So I'm waiting for this to sit in or set in. I'm going to go back to the roofs. I'm going to put the chimney in here and just let it bleed in. I'm going to put the roof in here. So I'm moving around so that I don't have to wait for that. I'll be working on something else. So I'm toning this roof down here quite a bit. And I'm going to do the same thing to the next one. So I'm adding some blue, some green. I'm kind of camouflaging that so you don't see that building right away. And then I'm going to take and add a lot of water to the next building. Like so. Just to slightly tone it so it sets back down. Now I can go into this building here, that roof. And I'm going to take the little bit of ultramarine blue. But first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to darken the back part of this roof. And bleed it right up into the front. Just put some colors that I'm going to float down there a little bit. Then I'm going to simply come in here and tone that roof down like so. Leave this alone, jump across the highway here, and I'm going to tone in this building with the same colors, the body of the building. And I'm going to add a little bit of ultramarine blue, and I'm going to make this building a little bit darker. And I'm going to be very careful at the bottom of the building here because I don't want this sitting flat. So I'm going to create some feeling of the tufts of grass that are underneath here. And then we have this other little building that's out here. It's probably a little electrical building. I'm going to add a lot of blue-green to this. And then an accent of burnt sienna, just to bring it into the rest of it. And then I'm going to tone that building down, the roof down, with kind of a grayish blue. Very lightly, dry brushed. I don't want anything in particular about too much flatness. And then I'm going to come back to this building here, and I'm going to clean my palette off here a little bit. And this, I'm going to take the cobalt blue with a little bit of green that I have on the palette there, just a slight bit. And I'm going to add some more water to it. Then I can begin toning. Even that was not enough water. So I'll just take the rest of it and add some water to this. So it starts now melding with the rest of the cast shadow in for here. I can take a little bit of the raw sienna straight here. And I'm going to tone some of the building in right here, back in here a little bit, so that the building is just kind of there. A couple of things that I need to do before I do any more to the buildings. I went over the border here with rock, so I'm going to lift that and lift this. Now, as it turns the corner, even in the shadow, I can warm that up a little bit with some raw sienna to make it flip into the shadow a little bit more, because it's grayed down and it will be cooler, but it will turn the corner a little bit better. And I'm going to darken it right here above that shed line that's out front, so that we have, I have to look at this a little bit better here. So we have the buildings blocked in. I have not touched the ground out front, which I'm gonna go to now. And I'm gonna be very careful with this mid-ground. I don't want too much showing up here. So I am going to take, I think, my small cat tongue. And I'm gonna take what I have here, a little bit of the blue, some more burnt sienna. And I'm going to begin dry brushing in just from here on down. A little bit here, a little bit there. I don't want it all connected, because as soon as you connect it, you end up with lines of value. And I'm going to soften it here, a little bit there. This is the beginning of the end of the foreground, but not the end. I'm going to go right through the middle of the tracks, because that's one of the last things we'll work on. And I'm following the patterns of which has already been created for me, which creates a little bit more randomness than trying to plan it. And I'm just dry brushing in the same fashion I started off at, in kind of a vertical angle, moving it around, which creates those tufts of grass that we're looking at. And I'm looking at some of the darks that are here, where they need to be put in. Some of the railroad ties going across, just to get the feeling of that. There's a lot of little stuff in here that's going to portray the rest of it, but I'm not worried about it now. We'll take a little bit of burnt sienna here and intensify some of this color up front. And a bigger brush, some of the raw sienna in it. And I'm looking way over here. I am going to tone that all in, so it looks like that. So what we have here at this point is that I worked on this area with the tree, the buildings, tone this down, put the color in for the roof. The roof has various colors in it. Then I travel across and darken this in and darken the roof in, not being as light as the light on the building over here. Darken this little building in here. Then came to the foreground, just through this area. Didn't touch anything up in here. And I started adding some texture. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the burnt sienna and a little bit of the green here, and with a lot of water. And I'm going to slowly add in texture in the foreground with not only this color, but I'm going to add one more right across it. I'm going to take a little bit of the cobalt blue, and I'm going to add a little bit of that in, and that will bring the color of the sky down so that it's not isolated. A bit more blue. So you really can't tell what's going to happen or what it looks like until it dries, because it dries totally different. I'm adding just a little bit more blue, and that's it. So that's where we're going to stop. I have one or two sparrows up in the sky up there. So that's where we're ending. If there's any questions, please yell.
I have a question. The front of the big building, mine is white right now, and I didn't catch if yours is white or if you've put something on there. The very front of that, yeah, but the very front of it,
This
is
right
that
here,
white? Yeah,
that's the white of the paper.
so it still is white.
It still is white, and I had a little bit of bleed over right here that I'm going to pull up a little bit.
Okay,
It's not that noticeable. What I'm doing is I'm kind of going back and forth here a little bit. It has Now it has a tint of it. There's no longer white of the paper. But I haven't started with any of the windows yet. I haven't done any small detail except on these two trees right here. You notice I didn't touch that one. I don't want this to have any dark in it as these are back there.
Right, I just wanted to make sure that I didn't miss something there.
Oh,
Okay,
you got it right. The only thing I need to do is I need to add back in where I took out a little bit of the, because my roof got leaked into, which happens. But to create edges that are soft, there's two things you could do. You can keep it blended like this out here, or you can paint a close value to it, which will make it look like a soft edge. But you don't want to have hard edges everywhere. I got a few sparrows up in the sky up here. But it's something that should remain soft. Because every time you add something to the painting, it changes it sometimes very drastically. Go change the water. Any questions at all?
No.
Not yet, okay.
So Dale, what did you do after you finished all the buildings?
What I did after the buildings is I
Mhm.
came down into the foreground and I worked across with burnt sienna, cobalt blue, a little bit of the green through here, dry brushing it in a vertical angled way. Then I took the toothbrush with burnt sienna and raw sienna, sprayed it, and then some cobalt blue. I don't know if you could, there's the cobalt blue in there.
Okay. But you didn't do anything to the tracks.
Didn't do a thing to the tracks. I did bring a little bit of dark across the tracks in the middle area.
Okay.